Okay, we'll bring Craig on. We'll forego the break and we'll bring Craig Button on right now. There he is, looking as handsome as ever. Our good friend from TSN, Craig Button, joins us on the show now. Craig, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, and I was going to make darn sure I wasn't missing my allotted time slot here today on this Saturday after absolutely botching it last Saturday. So, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure. And hey, we're into that time of the year where there's a lot of fun, and a lot of like what could happen going on. So. I was happy to join you guys.
Well, our pleasure that you're able to join us. Craig, and you're right. It is sort of the silly season when it comes to the NHL with all the trades, free agency rapidly approaching, and of course the draft coming up on Wednesday in Nashville. And that's where we want to start with you and the draft. We know that Connor Bedard is going first overall. There's no question about that. And then you in your most recent mock draft, that's where, the headline is the fun starts after number one. But the player I want to ask you about isn't the guy you have going number two. It's Matej Michkov out of the KHL, because he's probably, I would say, the biggest wild card in the draft. In terms of his talent, it's impressive, but yet you have him going at 4 to San Jose. What's the risk reward when it comes to a player like Michkov?
I'm really not sure, Drew, if there's a risk. I'm really not sure there is. I mean, I've said this often. You can talk yourself out of any player you want to talk yourself out of. I've seen it for years. He's not big enough. Oh, look at where he's from. Oh, he's got a contract. So if you want to go down that path, it's really easy to talk yourself out of a player. But in the case of Matvei Michkov, and the reason I say that is he's a talented player. And where do you find these types of players? And when you start to consider, the timeline with the contract, 21 years of age is what he'll be when he comes over to the NHL. Well, most players are going to be 21 before they're ready to come in and maybe they play a year before, but to make an impact, that's where they're going to be age-wise. Now, you look at a talented player, you try to look at what your timeline may be and your patience level, and then you get a player coming in at 21 on an entry-level contract that could be elite productivity. I don't see risk there. I see reward. And what's interesting now, obviously we know that there hasn't been anybody outside of Russia that's been able to watch him live. But he's been seen lots live in previous years. And because of the pandemic, video scouting became a lot more comfortable for everybody. And the video you're getting and out of the KHL and out of Russia has been outstanding. So you make your decisions based on that and based on he's got a long runway of being watched. This isn't something like, oh, did you hear about this kid, this talent? He's been watched and he's been dominant. So when I look at it and just say, hey, I could make a case for him to go too. I can make a case for him to go too. I think Fantilli and Carlson are really good top-on players. And I put Will Smith in that category of 4 players right after Bedard. But I don't. Again, he's going to get drafted relatively early, and I think that again, the team's going to be excited. You're going to probably hear terms like, "Wow, we just couldn't pass up that kind of skill." We're not worried about his contract. When he comes, all those things you're going to hear, and it's interesting to me now hearing some of the stuff. Wow, his personality. Oh yeah, all this stuff. It's it's just amazing. Like the rumor mill, how it starts, and people feeding it all off. I mean, I get it, I understand it, but to me, he's an elite striker. I call him an elite striker.
Craig, we talked about Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli. You mentioned Leo Carlson. These guys are going to be top 5 picks. But as you know, the Jets don't pick until 18th overall. A couple of years ago, we had you on the show. That's when the Jets took Chaz Lucius, and of course, you had another couple forwards being drafted by the Jets last year with Rutger McGroarty and Brad Lambert. And obviously, we've been, focused on your rankings, Bob McKenzie's rankings, and there's a lot of good forwards that are options there. Like last week, we talked about Braden Yager, guys like Nate Danielson, Oliver Moore. I look at your last Craigslist, and there's a lot of Swedish defensemen there. And, obviously, we're playing speculation station here, but when you're talking about a guy like Axel Sandin Palika, or you're talking about a Tom Willander, like, I guess what stands out to you about those guys? And do you see those guys being available at 18th overall for the Jets?
Yeah, I don't see Sandin Pellikka being there. I could see a case where Willander is there, but they're two different types of players. Number one, they're both right shot defenders. The biggest thing for me, Ezra, is that watching them over 18 months, their progression has been so significant. And that's, you're not just going to watch a player and say, oh, he played good, therefore he's good, or he didn't play good. You're watching the development and the progression of these players over time. And, Sandin Pellikka, he showed some really good elements. He's so poised with the puck, understands where the puck needs to go, how to alleviate pressure in the defensive zone, how to make plays in the offensive zone. It took me a little bit of time to come up with a comparable, but the more comparable type, the more I watched them, I kept getting flashbacks to Sergei Zubov. And then, I said, Craig, be careful. Zuby's a Hall of Famer. I was lucky to when I was in Dallas, he was there and he was brilliant. And but that's the type of game. There's not a lot of flash and dash to Sandin Pellikka, but you go back in time and you watch him over that period of time. I mean, at the World Junior in Halifax, he was a 17-year-old defenseman that had the most minutes, the most time on ice per game of any defenseman on Sweden. Like, you're going, wait a sec, 17. Then you go watch him again. You watch him just continue to take the game and just control the game. And that's the type of defenseman I see him as. That great with the puck, great poise. He goes as fast as he needs to go. And, it's not going to show up on the highlight reels, but it's going to be really effective for your team. Willander is a little bit more robust. He's got a little bit more of an edge to him. I've compared him in terms of his style of play, kind of a cross between Rasmus Anderson and Charlie McAvoy. And, he's confident in his game. He's hard in his game. And he, like Sandin Pellikka, and it's interesting how they're tied together being Swedish, tied together being right shot defenders. But Tommy Willander really took another step in his game when Sandin Pellikka was away at the World Junior camp and then Tommy Willander became the number one guy. Anders Eriksson, not the former player, but the coach, he said to me, he goes, Tommy didn't know how good he could be. He was kind of always, behind Sandin Pellikka, but he needed to be that guy to take a step ahead. And what Anders said, he goes, now that he sees it, he goes, we're going to keep encouraging him to be that guy. And I think that you confidence and everything that goes with it. But he's a little bit bigger and a little bit more robust. And I think in that regard, but those types of defensemen to me are hard to find. They're hard to find. The intelligence, the competitiveness, the puck play. And so when you factor it all in, not a lot of what I would call top three defenders in the draft. For me, I see that at the top end, I'm going through 25. I see three guys: Reinbacher, the Austrian, and then the two Swedes. So if there's a defender there and you want him, I think you're going to have to take him. And that's why it might be a little bit of a stretch for any one of those three to be there at 18. But, as you when I did the mock draft, I mean, that's really just a fun exercise. Who could fit where, you're using a lot of different things to do it. But at the end of the day, I don't see those three guys being available at 18. Now that could change. What I will say is this: the depth of this draft is so good through 2025 that if he's there, that's fine. Or if you have a choice but there's lots of good players that are going to be available. The Jets are going to have to make a choice. It's not like, we'll just take the last guy standing. They're going to have to, it's going to come down to them making a choice between really good players.
Well, and Craig, going to the forward side of things with that 18th pick, if the Jets go that way, I know you have them going to a program they're a little familiar with Oliver Moore as I think you called him a speed demon, or his speed to burn when you were on TSN the other day. So maybe talk about him a little bit so Jets fans can get an insight into what kind of player he is, and maybe one or two other forwards you could see in that realm that maybe the Jets would end up selecting.
Yeah, well, so let's start with Oliver. So that national team development program, the progression they made over the last 18 months again, as U17 players, they were good. You could see that there was talent there, but they literally took right off. But I call it the 4-2-9 line. That was Perreault, Will Smith, and Ryan Leonard. It's the best line I saw outside the NHL this year. Best line. They were unbelievable. Now, Oliver didn't have the benefit of having a lot of skill on his wings. And so he was asked to do a lot of different things in the game, and he did them really, really well. When he did end up getting some skill on his wings, his offense really took off. And I think you got to keep that in mind when you look at the numbers for him offensively. So you've seen a player that can contribute in all areas of the game. You've also seen a player that really saw a push in his offensive productivity when he had better offensive players around him. And I think that bodes really well for Oliver Moore going forward. But that speed that he possesses is disruptive. It's not comfortable for opponents when he's out on the ice. It's really unsettling because he's so quick, he's so fast, and he's powerful. He's powerful. So, it's not just like a little nudge is going to set him. First of all, you got to get close enough to him to give him a nudge, right? And even if you give him a nudge, it's not going to deter him. It's not going to knock him awry. He's that good. And he uses it so many different areas of the game, like, to create turnovers, to put pressure on, to force bad plays. He's a great penalty killer, and he's competitive. Like he moves the needle competitively. Like what's interesting, I compared him to Dylan Larkin in terms of his style, and that's who Oliver compares himself to as well, which is always interesting. When I say type of player, it's always interesting. I mean, I get it. Some players go, "Oh, I'd like to be like Crosby." Okay, but your game isn't Crosby, right? But when a player says, "Yeah, I see my game like Dylan Larkin," you go, "Yeah, that's where he's at." And I think a big part of these players, any young player, is coming to an understanding of what your game is. And they've all been good offensively, but sometimes your game has to change a little bit as you move up the ladder. And I think for any player, the sooner you understand what your game is, I think the better it is for you to just zero in and focus in on those areas of your game that will allow you to be a really productive NHL player.
Craig Button's our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, talking about the upcoming NHL draft. Wednesday night is round 1. Live coverage back here on our YouTube channel, of course, as usual. Craig, between Adam Fantilli and Leo Carlsson, is there a lot separating the two of them, or is it really a matter of beauty in the eye of the beholder for who a particular team prefers at number 2?
I think you nailed it, Drew. It's what you prefer. Adam is a hard driving, fast, competitive, hungry, determined offensive player. I mean, he's attacking. He's got attack on his mind, and he plays at such a frenetic pace that becomes really difficult because not only do you have to handle the speed, then you got to handle the size, and then you got to handle that deep competitive determination, and he's got that. He's got his mind. I'm going to the net. I'm driving at you. He doesn't deal with, I'm going to be handling the puck here and circling there and everything. He knows where he wants to go when he goes there. And with that size and determination, he's hard to handle. He's a hungry goal scorer. Leo Carlsson is more of a playmaker. He's rounded out his game a little bit more with respect to shooting more, but I mean, a big playmaking center. And I know that Leo's looked at himself a little bit like Barkov. I see him more like Nicholas Backstrom of the Washington Capitals. And so when I look at Leo, if you got really good scoring wingers, Leo Carlsson is going to be the center that gets you the puck. When the puck's on his stick, he understands where the best opportunities are, and then he can execute on them. And so when I had him going to Columbus, it's like, what's going to get, like, Patrick Laine has the ability to be a 50-goal scorer. Alexander Ovechkin had Nick Backstrom. I think Leo Carlsson playing with Patrick Laine sets him up to be a big, to enhance his goal scoring ability. And Fantilli, just the way he plays, and a little bit like McKinnon, and with respect to the way it's driving, he's a driving force. Two different types of players, But for me, when you look at both of them and you look at what they offer, frontline players, productive players, competitive players. And so it just depends what you're looking for and what you want. Now, one team's going to have to make a choice between the two. And once one of them is off the board, then you might be making a choice between one and somebody else. But, somebody's going to have to make a choice between Fantilli and Karlsson. And it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
Craig, I'm sticking with Sweden. I was asking you about defensemen earlier. I wanted to ask you about Otto Stenberg because he's a guy that I'll be honest, I didn't know a lot about. And then I've been reading up on him. I know a lot of Jets fans just because you have him ranked right around there. And then actually we should mention in your mock draft, he was taken right before, and I realize this is all fun. So I mean, I'm not holding you to
If you're
Stenberg
one
wins.
pick off, Craig, you're going to hear about it. Let me tell you.
Absolutely, we're going to have you on after the draft, Craig, to completely tear apart your mock draft. But no, Otto Stenberg.
We have the tar over here and the feathers over here. And we're just ready to put them together.
But I think a lot of Jets fans, he's a winger. We should mention that he's not the biggest guy. I think he's at 5'11" or 6 feet. But he's a guy, I think, that when you read his scouting report, he's got the shot, he's got the speed. And then I think a lot of Jets fans like the fact that he's kind of got that little bit of an agitator role. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty a little bit. So what stands out to you about Stenberg, who's obviously, we're expecting to go in the first round, and there's a good chance it's going to be in the top 20?
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit scared because just over Drew's shoulder, I can see the tar heating up. It's getting hotter and hotter, so I'm afraid about how that's going to feel. But Otto he's been the captain of that 2005 born group in Sweden, so that speaks right there to his leadership ability. I think he's a hard driving winger. He's got the skill, he's got the speed, he's got an excellent shot. But to your point, Ezra, he's got an edge to him. He's hard. Like you think about competitive players and how important they are to winning at critical times. I'm not talking about winning at critical times. And there's times during the regular season that it's critical. It's not just playoff time. And Otto is that player, and he plays the game with a real understanding of what his skills are, and then how to work it into the game with whoever he's playing with. Like he's fast, but he doesn't know. He understands I don't always have to go fast. He sets up to shoot the puck, but he knows he can make plays. He's a really good penalty killer as well. Another player that's a really good penalty killer. When I did the mock draft and I did Detroit, they drafted some centers. They got some defensemen and trying to get some, just a little bit heavier, skilled, harder players. That's why I had them taking Colby Barlow and Otto Stenberg. Kind of, if that's their mandate, or if that's what they're focusing on, those are two guys that I think. That's why I do the mock draft based on that, because I think I'm listening to, this is what we're looking for. So that's where I try to make a fit there. But Otto Stenberg's like it's interesting because over the course of time, he played at the U18 in April of 2022, and Sweden won the U18 championship. He was a younger player, but he played. Then, at the Halinka, and then, at the different tournaments over time, and I think in the league, he struggled a little bit, like trying to find a way. But I would say probably in the February on, he really asserted himself. And internationally, he's always played very, very well in his age group against, the better competition. I see a really, really good player. And when you ask me about players, well, if he's there at 18, let's say he's there at 18 and Moore's there at 18 and Callum Ritchie's there at 18 and, maybe Samuel Hanzik's there at 18. That's what I mean about having to make a decision. It would be easy to just say, they're all in a group. They're all, in my view, really, really good players. They all add different things, in terms of their skill set, but really, really good players. And, as you go through the evaluation and try to understand what fits for us and what we would really like, it's not that you're dismissing good players. You're just saying, this is our preference here. Tonight I'm having steak instead of chicken, and you know what, however you want to assess it. But I think they're going to have more than ample opportunity. Let me say one more thing here. Just, we talk about depth in the draft. Here's how I define the quality of this draft. And people say it's deep. And I think I look at it and I go, 20, 21, 22 deep, maybe through to 25. Top 2 line forwards and top 3 defensemen. Rarely do I see that. Rarely do you see that type of quality, that deeper into the draft. And so people ask me, do you think Danielson will be there at 16? Because I had him going to Calgary. I said, I don't know. But if he isn't, you're going to have another good player to pick from, a group of good players to pick from. That's a good thing. A lot of times, and I joke about this, and Dennis Patterson, I worked alongside for a number of years, longtime scout, chief scout with the Philadelphia Flyers. He always used to say, he used to joke, he goes, oh, it's funny how teams are. If you're picking 11, the scouts start to go, yeah, there's only about 9 good players. Like if you're picking 9, there's only 7 good players. Nobody's going to get away in the top 25 this year saying there's only 20 good players. There's a lot of quality in this draft, deep, deep, deep.
Well, Craig, speaking of depth, I remember in 2014, we were riding the bus in Philly, going from the hotel to the arena. And even though we were at the 2014 draft, everybody was talking about the 2015 draft. It was focus was already on. I heard scouts talking, because that's kind of the nice thing, is everybody's riding the bus, media, scouts, management, whatever it is. So you kind of get, assessments. And I remember Ezzy and I were sitting there and we're like, everybody, how are they already talking the 15 draft? We're in 14, but there was so much excitement. And this year, it felt like everybody has been so excited about the depth of the 23 draft. And so that's what I want to get to, is that idea of depth. And, the Jets have found some diamonds in the rough. Speaking of 2015, Mason Appleton in the 6th round. Of course, Connor Hellebuck in the 5th round. Andrew Kopp in the 4th round. Now, those guys are the exception to the general rule. But for you, what are some players that are maybe not those top 2 rounds, but could potentially be diamonds in the rough for an organization?
Yeah, when you ask that question, David, I try to assess the players in the top part of it, right? And a lot of players, and what are diamonds in the rough? Diamonds in the rough are players that are, probably haven't grown, aren't physically mature, still have lots of development ahead of them with respect to their abilities to really show. And I've even said this about players, when you start talking about, why didn't he get drafted? Well, sometimes players aren't ready to be drafted. They haven't shown enough to be drafted. And that's not a knock. That's just a case of where the players find themselves at that point in time in terms of maturity. But, so where do I head? So, I go to different places. It's easy to go to the smaller forward and say, well, that's where there could be a diamond in the rough. And certainly we've seen lots of evidence of that. But, I'll give you a name. And he played for Erie. He played for the U.S. national team at the U18 turn, Carey Terrance. Now, Carey Terrance is an excellent skater. And, Erie wasn't a good team, but when he got with the USA team at the U18, you could really, really see a lot of ability, a lot of understanding of how his speed can have even a greater impact in the game. And, he's somebody that's a little bit raw still, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But when you skate like that, and then you show that understanding as you move up a level at the U18, I think that becomes something that's really, really important. Do you want me to go to a local Winnipeg kid now? Sure. And Jaden Perron? I mean, he had a really strong season with the Chicago Steel. Really strong season with the Chicago Steel. He needs years to just physically mature and to get stronger but when you look at him and you look at the thinking and you look at how he handles the power play and you look at how he handles offensive situations with really good players, if you're ready to be patient, and I think you need to be patient with a player like that, then down the road you could end up with a really, really top-notch player, like somebody that can play on your probably your top 6, play on the power play, give you some offense. And those are things you're always looking for. And, you just park those guys and let them just go and do what they need to do. And, there's like, I think about, like, you're looking for a goaltender. Like, I don't know where the size thing is going now. I mean, you look at what Dustin Wolf has done when, we're seeing other goaltenders that, maybe not the tallest of goaltenders, but have a lot of ability. And so is Scott Ratzlaff a guy? He's a darn good goaltender. He played behind Thomas Milic in Seattle. You're looking at somebody that, is going to be a frontline player for Seattle in the next few years. He should be a player that's going to be a full consideration for the World Junior team in Canada. And he's got a lot of those abilities. Again, you just look at him. He's about 6'1" now, but the abilities are really, really strong. But you just got to be patient with those abilities, help them grow, help them get better. And I think that down the road, then you can find players that really, really have an opportunity to find their way to the NHL. One other player that I would mention, and it's interesting just as time goes on, is Tyler Peddle. Now, Tyler is from the Atlantic provinces, played in Drummondville. This guy has unbelievable speed. Drummondville was a team that was okay, but not great. But, if I'm going to take a chance on somebody in the third, fourth round, it's on guys that have those skill sets that already scream NHL. I know there's parts of his game that have to be worked on, but that speed is dynamic. And he's shown a real panache for being able to score. So, those are just a few of the names that I mentioned deeper down the draft list, so to speak, but certainly players that I think have NHL potential.
Just quickly, Peter Woods of Hockey Manitoba is going to like the Jaden Perron reference. Craig, former Winnipeg Bruin U18 AAA. Just wanted to mention, too, he's going to go to UND. So if the Jets are able to draft him, won't have to travel long, about an hour and a half down the street to North Dakota to go watch him. But I just wanted to get that, and I appreciate the plug for Hockey Manitoba.
You made the plug for Hockey Manitoba. It was your own plug, is what you're saying.
Yeah, but Craig mentioned him, so it's always good to get the Winnipeg kid in. He's really talented, as Craig mentioned. He's a few years away from cracking the NHL, but he's a really good player.
Ezra, I know what platform I'm on. I didn't bring up Jaden Perron just because I like his skill. I know where he's from.
Craig, that's it. You're off the hook on the tar and the feathering. I'm giving that to Ginsburg instead. You're in the clear now, Craig. Craig Button is TSN's director of scouting. The NHL draft goes Wednesday live, round one coverage back here on our YouTube channel. Craig, appreciate your time, appreciate your insight. Thanks for doing this.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure. And it's going to be an exciting time, not just the draft, but everything leading up to the draft and then free agency. I think there's lots of things going on. It's interesting. You got lots of stuff going on in Winnipeg, and now the Calgary Flames are kind of facing very similar circumstances. So, a lot of interest with those two Western Canadian teams.
Absolutely. We've talked about it for the last couple hours, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about it for days on end. Craig, appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this morning.
Thanks.
Let's head to break.
Cheers,
when
Craig.
we come back, one final segment on this Saturday morning. You're watching the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Thanks for listening to this broadcast from Illegal Curve Hockey. For more great Illegal Curve content, subscribe to the Illegal Curve YouTube channel, follow @Illegal Curve on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and visit your online home for hockey in Winnipeg, illegalcurve.com.